Did you know that 60% of home buyers struggle with selling and buying at the same time? Navigating this process in today's cutthroat market can feel impossible, especially when you don't go about it the right way. So what's the secret to making it work without ending up homeless or in some cases overextended? Let's break it down and help you make a seamless move. Buying and selling a home at the same time isn't just a logistical challenge, it's also a financial and emotional balancing act, especially in markets with tight inventory and high buyer demand. And along with that, there are risks involved, which in some cases means losing out on your dream home, in some cases maybe having two mortgages at the same time, or maybe you're facing that dreaded gap where you're neither a buyer nor a seller and you're just kind of stuck in limbo. This video is not only going to provide you clear strategies to navigate these challenges, but also avoid common pitfalls and ultimately be able to coordinate both transactions like a pro. And at the end of the day, when it comes to selling and buying, you really have three different ways to approach this. One is that you can just buy another house and keep your current house, but that comes with its own challenges. The second option is that you can sell a house, rent somewhere for some period of time, or maybe stay with a family member and then buy a property. And the last option is this contingency where you're selling a house and buying a house at the same time. And I really want to walk you through all three of them just to make sure you're considering all possibilities, because in some cases, maybe you can do all three. You have an option to do all three. But in some cases, maybe your only option is the contingency option where you essentially need the funds from that home you're selling to buy that property and you want to do it at the same time. But before we dive into those options, I want to take a step back and talk about what you should be considering if you're considering buying another house, right? It's not as easy as just going out there and going to an open house or calling an agent and start looking at property if you have a property to sell or if you need funds from a property. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. So the first thing you need to do as a potential seller who is also a buyer is look at your financial position. Are you in a position to be able to buy another property without selling your current home? Can you carry two mortgages at the same time? Now, in your head, you might think you can, but can you on paper? And that's why it's important to talk to a mortgage professional early in the process, as soon as you start thinking about this, just to see where you are financially. Because at the end of the day, that's going to tell you what your options really are. Now, in my experience, most people aren't in a position where they can carry two mortgages. For one, they might not have the down payment to put down on the other house, but more importantly, the debt to income ratio might be too high because based on the lender's guidelines, you're essentially overextended. So start that process by talking to a mortgage professional. Start the process by telling them what you're trying to do and let them tell you what your numbers are. In some cases, maybe you can do it, but financially you're looking at the numbers and you're just thinking, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to overextend myself. And that's ultimately why most people end up either selling a house and waiting a period of time before buying something or doing it contingent, which is really what we're going to focus on in today's video. But that's where I want to ask you, what's your biggest worry about buying and selling at the same time? Make sure you drop your answer in the comments and I'll come back in and share some personalized advice. Now, it's really, really important when you start that conversation with a mortgage professional, you're using somebody that has experience, that has knowledge, that doesn't just do, one type of loan. They need to have experience with bridge loans, with home equity lines, with hard money, just so they're going over all your options so that you can make a logical decision. A lot of people believe that they have to sell property A to buy property B. Well, in some cases, there are products out there where you can borrow money from property A to put down on property B so that you can carry both at the same time. There are also some other ways to approach it, but just make sure you're talking with a professional, not somebody you just found online. Get a referral. If you want to work with somebody, you don't know where to start, I put a link in the description of the video where you can get in touch with my personal lender and he can guide you through that process. Now, the next thing I want you to think about if you're someone that's considering selling and buying something else is to talk to a realtor earlier in the process, especially if you plan on selling that current home at some point. Maybe you don't need to sell it now, maybe you do, but it's really, really important that you start that conversation early. And the reason for that is because what typically happens is most buyers decide that they want to buy another property. And they just go out there and start looking. They start going to open houses. They start looking online. They're just doom scrolling, if you will, in bed, looking at every single property that comes online, which honestly is completely normal. But then this is what happens. somebody falls in love with a property and then they're ready to make an offer. And then they call somebody like me and they say, Jeb, we're ready to buy a house, but we need to sell our house, which can create logistical nightmares, especially if they need the funds from property A to be able to put in property B. So the earlier you're having this conversation with the mortgage professional, with the real estate agent, the better off you're going to be so that you can position yourself correctly so that there is less emotion, less stress in the process. Remember, people are buying emotionally and justifying logically. And so there's a lot of emotion going on when you're selling a house and trying to buy a house at the same time. So the less stress, the less emotion that you can get rid of because of proper planning, the better off you're going to be long term. And this reminds me of a story of some good friends of mine who called me about this time last year and told me, hey, Jeb, we found a house. We want to put an offer in. And my first question to them was, that's awesome. What are we going to do with your current house? Do you need the funds from your current home to be able to buy this other home? And they said, yeah, we do. And I said, okay, well, we have a problem because we need to get your property on the market, which means we need to take pictures, we need to stage, we need to clean it up, we need to do all of these different things to get it ready to go on the market since you need the funds from that property, because chances are no sellers are going to take you serious as a buyer if you make an offer contingent on selling your home, especially if your home's not even on the market. Now, there are some ways to do this, and we're going to talk about it. But in the case of these friends, they actually missed out on that first property because we were kind of behind the eight ball. We weren't in a position to get it on the market soon enough to be able to put in a contingent offer with the home on the market. We did make an offer, but our home wasn't quite on the market yet. The seller didn't accept it. So we ended up in backup position, and that home ended up selling to someone else. Now, my clients ended up finding a property, but at that point, we already had buyers looking at their home ready to make an offer, so that when we made that other offer, we were essentially in escrow on their property as well. So there are definitely some challenges in this process, and the earlier you address them by having conversations, by communication, and just feeling things out to figure out where you are, the better off you're going to be in the process. Now, if we go back to option one, where you can keep property A and buy property B, there's not really a lot that you need to consider in that process because you've already talked to a mortgage professional, you understand carrying both payments, there's not really a lot of concern there. If you're someone who's considering selling your property and you need to either rent back or you're going to live with a relative for some period of time before buying another home, that's also pretty straightforward in the process as well, as long as you have your next housing lined up. Now, in some cases, you might be able to rent back your current property for a period of time while you try to find a home, but in some cases, that's not going to be the case because a buyer might be selling their home and need a place to live. So you just need to consider both options there. Now, the most common, and probably the reason you're watching this video, is for someone who needs to sell their home and they need the funds from this house in order to buy the next house. And maybe you're not in a position to do a bridge loan. Maybe you just don't want to be in that position and potentially be overextended for any reason. So this is usually where most people fall. So if you're in this position, again, the first place to start is talking to that mortgage professional, talking to a real estate agent, getting your house ready, start prepping it, doing the things that need to be done before it goes on the market. So if you think you're going to be buying a house this year and you're wanting to sell your house in order to do that, start having that conversation early on so that you know what needs to be worked on. Because again, most people will go out and find a property and then work backwards and put themselves where they're essentially painting themselves into a corner and they don't really have options. In order to have the best experience possible, you're going to have your home on the market before you ever start looking at other property. Now, you could be looking online and trying to find out neighborhoods, trying to find properties, but in most cases, you're not going to be making an offer until your home's on the market. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do it. Like I said earlier, most sellers aren't going to consider you a real buyer unless your home's on the market. And that's what you need to take into consideration. In fact, put yourself in that position as a seller. If you had a buyer coming to you wanting to put an offer in on your property, but they told you, hey, I need to sell my home before I can buy your home and my home's not even on the market, how would you feel? Actually, let me know in the comments below. But I'll tell you, as a real estate agent, I would recommend that you didn't accept that offer because you don't want to tie yourself up with a buyer who doesn't even have their home on the market. Because guess what happens if their home doesn't go into escrow? Well, you've essentially wasted this period of time by dealing with them when you could have been showing it to other potential buyers out there in the market. Now, one of the questions that comes up a lot is, well, what happens if I put my home on the market and I get an offer and I can't find a property that I want to move into, or I can't meet certain deadlines based on their contract? Well, the good news is there are ways to protect you in that process, and that is essentially selling your home contingent on finding a replacement property. Now, in some cases, buyers might frown upon this, but over the last couple of years, this has been completely normal because we've had low inventory, high buyer demand. There really haven't been a lot of options out there for potential sellers. And so what happens is people know that they're wanting to buy another home, so they're putting their home on the market while they wait for the right home to come on the market. And in order to protect themselves and keep themselves from being homeless, they're making it contingent on finding a replacement home. And that's more or less what you do. You just build that language into the contract in order to protect yourself. And what happens is if you're not able to find that replacement home, then essentially you don't sell your current home. Now, in my experience, I have had people still move forward with the process even though they didn't find that replacement home. They just said, you know what, we're gonna go live with mom and dad or so-and-so for a period of time while we find that right home. And I think it's really, really important if you're someone who is considering selling and buying something else that you're looking at the market. Are you seeing things out there that fit what you're looking for in a home? Or is inventory in your market really, really tight? And what I mean by that, some people want to be in a specific neighborhood and there might be no listings in there at all. And so if you're someone that's considering selling your house and buying something in that neighborhood, it might take you longer than another neighborhood that has tons of inventory available. So just make sure you're navigating the market, you're using professionals, you understanding contractually what you're getting into. The last thing you want to do is accept an offer, not build in the contingencies properly on the selling side, and then end up having to sell your home and not having a place to go. Now, a lot of times sellers who are buyers think this is a super complicated process. It's not quite that complicated, especially when you have agents like myself, been doing this a long time. We do a lot of these. You just need to make sure you structure it properly. Now, on the buying side, when you find that right home, you're also going to be able to contingency on that side as well, that it's contingent on your down leg property, the property that you're selling, closing, because what you don't want to do again is get in contract on a property to buy it, have money in escrow, a deposit, have your contingencies essentially released, and not have that contingency on the other side. Because what happens if that deal falls apart, then maybe you don't have the funds to be able to buy that property, and there's potential risk of you losing a deposit. So you just need to understand all the sides of it, have somebody be able to walk you through that process. But more importantly, know that you have a backup. In case something does go wrong, you're not in a position where you have to do something. And with that said, you need to plan accordingly when selling and buying at the same time. Build a little bit of time to be able to stay in the property that you're selling, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks after the close of escrow, if possible, maybe even some sort of small rent back in that property, whether you have to pay for it or whether it's built in, it's free or whatever, so that if there is a delay on one side, you're giving yourself a little bit of time to shift. You don't want hard deadlines. Yes, contracts are hard deadlines, but with open communication and going back and forth, things can be negotiated. But if you give yourself a little bit of time, just in case your up-leg property doesn't close on time, you're not in a position where you have to move the day that you close, right? That can be stressful. So if you have a little bit of time to be able to move things after the fact, that will help you in the process. And I'll say is a lot of times when we do contracts like this, we're closing on Thursday on property A, and then those funds are moving to property B, and we're closing property B on Friday. Sometimes it's the same day, Thursday and Thursday. And a lot of times that can create some additional stress. So if you build in a couple of extra days, yeah, you might have to pay a little bit more of a mortgage on one side or a little bit extra rent over here in order to make it work. But in my experience, less stress ends up being a better process all the way around. So my advice is to start with proper preparation like we talked in this video, because small issues can snowball and become a bigger thing when it's not done correctly. Also, make sure you're working with professionals that have experience in buying and selling at the same time that can walk you through this process so that you understand it, because the key to successfully buying and selling at the same time is preparation, along with flexibility and ultimately partnering with the right professionals. If you found any value in today's video, make sure you hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.